This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Today's guest is Jeff Bailey. He's founder of Avita Yoga, a Rolfing trained movement expert, and author of Mobility for Life. With over 45 years of experience in yoga and body work, Jeff has redefined what it means to care for our joints, not just stretch our muscles. In this episode, we explore the counterintuitive truth about flexibility, how joint compression can actually cleanse and heal, and why following the little tickles of intuition might just be our life's biggest guide. Whether you're a seasoned yogi or someone trying to avoid surgery, Jeff's wisdom will stretch your perspective in all the right ways. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please help me welcome Jeff to the show. Welcome, Jeff. It is exciting to have you on the show today. I've actually been looking forward to this because along in Uncommonly Remarkable, we've talked around a lot of subject matters. And because I'm a healthcare provider, I always end up somewhere back thinking about wellness, healthcare, kind of thinking about how people live in their bodies and ways to make it better. And this fits right in, and I am excited to have you join me.
Yeah, thank you, Artis. It's awesome to be here with you.
So I am not, admittedly, a yoga practitioner. So I understand some of the premises and some of the things, but I'm glad to have you here so you can help me understand a lot more. So you've written a book. I think you've got a book that's upcoming. You've got Avita Yoga. And so talk to me a little bit about just yoga as a general practice and what it really means.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. I think we could spend a lot of time answering that question. But um, I'm 61 years old. Yoga has been part of my life now for over 45 years, and so it was back in about 1985. I stumbled into my first yoga class, and I walked out just feeling so full and so alive and kind of vibrant. And I asked the teacher, I said, "What did I just do?" You know, the word yoga was very new in the early 80s, and he said, "Well, yoga means to join." And I immediately thought, then why did we spend so much time pulling ourselves apart if yoga means to join? But I asked that question kind of became a mantra through my 20s. And it's a very good question to ask. If yoga means to join, what does it mean to join? And that led to the first book, the Yoga Mind, because if we go back far enough, we start to realize yoga is really all about the mind and joining in the oneness, where intuitive guidance and happiness and joy and peace, all that comes from joining. But um, that seed was planted that really got me questioning this thing called yoga. I traveled a lot in my 20s. I studied with lots of different teachers. And along the way, I had a few injuries. I had a ski, living here in Colorado, I've always been a skier. And so I had a ski injury that went to my knee, and that got me introduced to this thing called Rolfing. I don't know if you've
Oh,
ever heard of
wow.
Rolfing.
No, so talk about Rolfing.
Yeah. So Rolfing is a form of body work that targets connective tissue. Ida Rolf was a real pioneer in connective tissue. That's the shiny white stuff. For those of you who, you look at an anatomy chart, then they tend to cut it out of the way. But it also is sort of the binding agent. It's the fabric that holds us together. And when you get close to the bones and close to the joints, it tends to concentrate. That's where we have
Mm,
tendons and ligaments and things like that, right? So Ida found that by putting a little bit of heat and pressure, she would use elbows and we use our knuckles, and we put some pressure into those areas and then ask for movement. And she had this term that I love called reorganization. That was the whole thing. People would go through a series of 10 classes with her, and that's what you learn at the Rolf Institute. You learn how to do a 10 series with people, and you unwind the patterns, you unwind the restrictions that live in the fascia, in the connective tissue, and people really get nice results from it. And so, I will often say, artists, I'll say that my Rolfing training was the best yoga training I ever had, because it took me out of the muscles and into the connective tissue and closer to the joints. And I also, for most of my life, had this pretty strong feeling that muscles are not really designed to stretch. And I grew up the son of a veterinarian, and I had my hands in everything. And I just remember him stitching muscle tissue together and just seeing, all kinds of things as a kid, helping him.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really, really got this in my heart that muscle tissue is really not designed to stretch. And so when we target the connective tissue, we get results, and so mostly we use in Avita Yoga, we use the muscles to target the connective tissue and the bones and joints, which is a whole radically different approach, but it's where we get some pretty amazing results.
So that statement around muscles and stretching is maybe something that's not really thought of, right? Because if I'm thinking about flexibility training or mobility training, you end up putting yourself in different positions, really trying to lengthen the muscle. And so conventionally, I think people think from stretching, it's really about making that muscle longer, which is stretching the muscle. So tell me a little bit about why you don't think that's the way it should work.
Yeah, for sure. So I often say muscles release or muscles extend, but they don't really stretch. And if you ever go to the store and you come home with a piece of chicken or a piece of steak or something like that, and you try to stretch that tissue, there's nothing stretchable about it. And, you went through some medical training to do what you do, and you probably remember some of I don't know if you ever had your hands on any of that, but the tissue inside a live body doesn't behave that much differently. And so that brings us to these, if we go deep enough, there are characteristics of muscles. It's contractile, it extends, it's excitable. And the last one in the 4 characteristics is elastic. Muscle has an elastic quality. But what's the definition of elasticity? The definition of elasticity is something that the shape is altered, but it automatically returns to its original shape.
Mm-hmm.
That's elastic. And then we jump to probably the first thing that went into your head when I said elastic is a rubber band. Because rubber bands are elastic. You can stretch them and then they return to their original shape. But if you stretch them too much, even a rubber band will start to tear, and eventually it will lose its elasticity. Leave it in the drawer long enough and it loses its elasticity, and that just means it stops returning to its original shape. And if we pull on it enough, it will actually, the constitution of it will start to change. And so it's really kind of a controversial topic, but when we drill down into it and look at the details, I'm quite convinced muscle tissue is not designed to stretch. And it's exactly why a lot of people don't like to stretch. It just doesn't feel good to a lot of people. And that leads to the idea that there is a difference between mobility and flexibility.
Yeah.
And so you even used a moment ago the word mobility exercises, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do a mobility exercise, what are you thinking?
It's I think about increased range of motion or being able to help reduce or prevent the chances of injury by helping to uh, uh, move the tissue around the joint in a way that the joint becomes more stable,
Yeah.
or able to handle more load or pressure.
Hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Those are words that I use. And and so here's the essence of the Avita practice is we use the muscles actively or passively to get close as we can to the joint. That's where the fascia is, that's where the connective tissue is. And then we spend time in a shape, I don't call them poses, we spend time in the shape so that the all the tissues around the joint start to adjust and they start to adapt to the pressure and the position that we're in. And it's entirely different than trying to target the muscle and either stretch or strengthen the muscle. And I've just found that same as in the Rolfing world, the closer we get to the joints, when we target a shape or target an issue, the the um, the better the result, and it really kind of grabs our attention. If we go too fast into a joint, we get we kind of get rejected. There's a fear response that comes in because we've also been conditioned
Mm-hmm.
to protect our joints and stay out of them. Like, oh, there's pain there. I don't want to go into that. But it's remarkable what really starts to happen when we are willing to approach the pain a little bit and approach the joint in a very thoughtful way. So it's not so much what we do as it is how we do it. And what's remarkable, artists, is that once you start approaching the joint in this way that you thought was really wrong or upside down, all of a sudden, most students get to this place pretty quickly where they're like, wow, this feels really good. I can hang out here for a while.
Huh.
And then you stand up, you walk around, and sometimes results come quite quickly.
Well, so let's talk a little bit then about how we got here, because it feels like you've bucked a little bit of what is traditional. So you talked about being around your dad and learning around about anatomy through the work he was doing with animals.
Mm-hmm.
Did you always know that this is where you were going, or did you make stops along the way?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I was pretty convinced I was going to go into the medical world for quite a while, and so was my dad. But you know, for my dad and my family, work was play. I spent an enormous amount of time with him, both with large animals and small animal calls and things like that. And by the time I got to be about 17, 18 years old, when it was time to move on, I was kind of burned out on it. He had taught me so much about anatomy and physiology. He loved to teach. And I was just sort of ready for something different. Plus, I I, I I got this intuitive hit. I've been pretty good at following the intuition over the years, and I remember getting this intuitive hit that just said, "No, you're going to be more effective outside of the medical community. Your path is outside of that establishment." And it was a little nudge, and I just followed it, and I felt lost through my 20s a little bit because of that, but I kind of kept trusting it. Had opportunities to go into medicine, and I just didn't. And instead, I'm a yoga teacher, but it's the book is all about this idea that we're talking about of repurposing the muscles instead of just making them bigger and stronger. We got to go deeper
Mm-hmm.
because we're not going to the surgeons for bicep replacements. We're going to them for shoulder replacements, and we're going for knee replacements and hip replacements. And when we start giving the joints the same pressure that the bones love, we know bones need pressure, but joints do too. And if you catch it soon enough, to me, it's just basic hygiene for your bones and joints.
So that's also an interesting statement about pressure with bones. I mean, we all know that we see astronauts as an example when they
Yes.
spend time outside of normal gravity, bone density changes. So
Yeah.
we need the pressure on our bones to help maintain the way our bones function and to maintain bone health. And I don't think that we think that much about pressure, weight, gravity, those types of things on our joints. But you're exactly right. You know, people don't go and have shoulder. They go and have shoulder work. They don't have bicep replacements, right?
Mm-hmm.
I say that a lot about eyes. You know, you get one set. You can go and have dental work done and maybe teeth replacements, but we don't have eye
Mm-hmm.
replacements yet. So you got to take good care of them, right?
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so when you think though about how we limit our mobile or our motion around our joints because we may have an ache or a pain, how do you think about interpreting that discomfort, and then how do you get people to work around, through, or with that discomfort in order to get to a point where they feel better?
That's the $1 million question. Yeah, because we have been conditioned to avoid pain and seek comfort. And if we flip that on its head, I would say, if you're willing to flip that on its head in the subtlest way, now you have a healing practice, or now you have a spiritual practice. Because if I can look at the pain in my heart, or if I can look at the fear or the pain that I have in my head, in my mind, if I can look at that and be willing to go into it, it's a little awkward. It's a little painful to even go into the stuff that we don't really like about ourselves. Now we're getting somewhere. You know, this is how we heal, and we can all raise our hand and think back on times in our life where we were willing to look at the pain, ask for a little bit of help, talk about it, and have a breakthrough. Well, it works the same way in our bodies. And if you think about it, artists, you know, we go to the massage therapist, and you're at the massage therapist, and there they are using their fingers or their hands, and they get at something that really gets your attention. Like, oh, wow, there's a trigger point. And they're like, oh yeah, you know, what's going on here? And so, what do they do? But they kind of, a good body worker will find the pain points and then spend a little time with them.
Mm-hmm.
See, so it's a universal formula, and it applies to our bones and joints as much as anything else. So there's a real psychological element here. Now, like I already said, you can't go kind of blindly plowing into your bones and joints and start giving them pressure, because too much too fast works against us. In Avita Yoga, I often say there is one primary skill that we learn. It's not about lining body parts up. It's not about getting better at the yoga. The one primary skill we learn is how to discern the difference between pain and healing
Mm.
sensation. So this is an example I often use uh, in a situation like this, because most of us have a finger that we tend to favor these days for pushing buttons and mousing and doing things like that. So it's not uncommon to have a little stiffness somewhere in our pointer finger. And whether you have the stiffness or not, you can experiment and just take one hand. So I'm using my pointer finger and the thumb of one hand to pinch my pointer finger of my right hand. So it's like
Okay.
making you see it? So
Yep.
you're doing it with me. So if you start to pinch on it, you can look at your finger and you can see how it gets kind of white. It pushes the blood out a little bit, and you feel the pressure in the joints, right?
Right.
If you hang out there for 1.5 to 2 minutes, you'll start to feel the pressure kind of increase. But in your heart and your mind, you say, oh, this is okay. This is safe. I'm not doing any damage. But if there was a little arthritis, like you and I don't have any arthritis in our first finger, but a lot of people do, they would start to bend the finger in a little bit, and then they'd get to the arthritic pain. They'd go, oh, ow, and they'd want to avoid it.
To let go.
But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, no, no, no. go into that arthritic pain a little bit. You introduce your mind to it, and then you stop and you stay there. And then that's where the light goes on, the light bulb goes on in your mind. You're like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. I'll spend a little time here. Now, what's happening inside the joint when we do that? You know that we have these joints, all the primary joints in the body are called articulating joints. There's a synovial membrane that wraps around each one. And what's inside the synovial membrane? Synovial fluid. And that's a viscous fluid that lubricates, nourishes, and acts kind of like a shock absorber. But guess what else it does? It is the cleansing agent inside the joint.
Mm-hmm.
If we had blood vessels in our joints, they would get crushed. They wouldn't last long at all.
Right.
So nature needs a way to keep the inside of our joints clean and healthy. Because there's a metabolic process happening inside all of our joints. And where there's a metabolic process, you have waste.
Mm-hmm.
You have building blocks and then you have waste. So how is your body going to get rid of the metabolic waste that's accumulating inside of our joints moment by moment by moment? Pressure.
Pressure.
When you just make a fist and hold it for a minute or two, and that pressure is moving the fluid through the synovial membrane. It goes into this little area called the synovial subintima. And that's where the lymphatic vessels and the blood vessels hang out. 1 cell thick. This is where the capillaries are. So it's just the pressure just pushes it through the synovial membrane, which is very, very thin. Then it goes into the subintima, where the exchange of waste products and nutrients happen. And the synovial membrane is also the place where new fluid is produced. It's all right there. And every doctor I've ever talked to said, yeah, I remember studying that. I remember learning that. There's a whole chapter dedicated to really helping people understand this process, because it's prevalent throughout our bodies. But because we're conditioned to avoid pain, we're unwilling to go into these areas and just give it the nourishing pressure that both cleanses and remodels.
Yeah.
And now you go to the level of the cartilage and the bones, and now the whole process stimulates, the osteoblasts, osteoclasts. You remember that from school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been a while,
Yeah,
but
it's been a
yes.
while. Yeah.
So I guess then, if maybe we take a step backwards and try to understand the difference between, let's call it Western or US yoga practice as it exists today,
Yeah.
versus how you think about Avita, and like what are the major differences in the way you approach things?
Yeah. Great question. Well, gosh, where do I start? Avita is so radically different. I guess I would start maybe at the top and say that we don't aim to get better at Avita Yoga. We just want to feel better. So it's very, very practical.
That makes
There's,
that makes a lot of sense. That's also very interesting because like the competitive mindset says
yeah, exactly.
that you are doing yoga, you may not be great today, but boy, one day you're going to be
Yeah,
really good at it, and you're working towards getting that. So it's interesting to hear that that's not the aim.
yeah. I tried it through sections of my life. I really tried that. And I even went against this intuitive feeling I had about the stretchability of muscles. And I'm a fairly tight guy. I am not naturally flexible, but I was drawn to this because of that experience I shared with you earlier. I was sort of drawn to it, and I kept thinking, okay, there's got to be something to this, but I kind of kept hurting myself, and I didn't really ever enjoy the stretching process. Even though I had kind of made gains, uh, I believe that we're born with a certain constitution that kind of stays with us through our lives, uh, and that's why certain constitutions, certain types are drawn to yoga because their muscles respond better to it, and it actually feels kind of good to them. There's sort of almost an addictive quality to the stretch for some people, but those of us on the stiffer end of the spectrum um, are often the ones that are drawn to the Avita practice because it actually feels good. The moment you kind of get into a joint and you hang out there, it actually really starts to feel kind of good, and you have this intuitive feeling that it's working for you. And the moment we tap into the healing sensation, we become naturally peaceful. It's very soothing. So I feel like I got off topic from your question a little bit, Artis. Can you
Well,
bring me back?
yeah, because I think you're still sticking to the theme of the question, which is trying to understand the difference between traditional yoga practice and Avita, and some of the
Yeah, yeah,
things that are maybe
yeah.
similar or things that are disparate. And so, as I'm thinking about it, trying to kind of wrap my mind around the thought, if you were to think about poses and movements from a yoga perspective,
Really?
are the movements similar with a different aim, or do you think about it totally different?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So back to the differences. There's not a lot of similarity. Um, um, yeah, we take the competitive quality completely out of the practice. 95% of the practice is done with your eyes closed. We do a lot of work on the floor.
Mm,
For example, we might lie on the back and bring the knee to the chest. So you might picture it's a very simple shape, interlocking your fingers over your knee, bringing your knee towards your chest. What's happening there? We're putting compression on the anterior part of the hip. So we're compressing, the flexors have to relax and let go. So the hip joint is circumnavigational, lots of different ways to investigate the hip, but that's one, knee to chest. And then with your fingers interlocked over your knee, now you're adding compression to the knee. See, we're always thinking bones and joints.
mm-hmm.
And as you approach them, you may feel a restriction or some resistance in the soft tissue around them. And so that sensation, that feeling of a little bit of rigidity shows up. You close your eyes, you relax everywhere you can, and you spend time in the shape with the sensation, breathing only through the nose. We only nose breathe. And one of the things that I'll often say is if you find that you're breathing through your mouth, you're working too hard. And that's a whole other topic is the breathing techniques that we use. But very, very soothing. We have to stay in parasympathetic mode. We got to stay in a
Mm.
healing mindset, which is not competitive. Like I say, you can't you can't heal and be competitive at the same time. You know, they don't coexist. So lots of lots there's so much variety. That's a super cool thing about it. Is when we target the bones and joints, the variety is just endless. And so I have hundreds and hundreds of classes online, and no two are ever the same. And it's really this process, this systematic way of going through the body, kind of like hygiene for the bones and joints.
So, as you're kind of talking through the differences here, I would imagine that you would you wouldn't be able to walk into a yoga studio and do these things in traditional yoga. So, how did you branch out and create your own studio? Like, how did you go about
Yeah,
um,
out
getting
of
people
this.
to understand that this is different?
Yeah. Well, uh, I did open a studio in Boulder in 2012. So from 2012 to about 2022, I made it through COVID, and uh, that's where the whole concept just blossomed. I was already teaching yoga, so I had already owned the studio. It was an intuitive hit that my wife kind of planted the seed, and I never imagined owning a yoga studio. But following the intuitive guidance, it just felt like, oh my gosh, that's what we're supposed to do. And all the pieces came together, and within less than a year, we had this beautiful studio space. And there I was teaching yoga. Um, had a good number of other yoga teachers working for me, but there was so much that I questioned about yoga. There's so much I wasn't. My classes weren't that popular because I was just trying to kind of figure this thing out. And then about a year and a half into owning this studio, I had a severe hip injury, a skiing incident, high speed collision with the guy that I was skiing with. We smashed hips, and just a life changing event that led to all kinds of hip pain, sciatic pain, everything that I was doing. Like the yoga that seemed to help so many things in the past, the Rolfing, soft tissue work, PT, all kinds of things. Nothing was getting to it. And one day in a class, I'm sitting there, and so here's the shape. I'll show you what this shape, what this looks like. I happen to be sitting
Okay.
on the floor. So so here's a shape that we often do in yoga. It's called Sukhasana, and people usually pull their heels in really close like that this because it makes the shape or the pose doable. Well, we have to find the restriction, and the hip is a huge joint. It's circumnavigational in nature. So the moment you bring your feet out like this, every once in a while, you'll see a shape like this. It's sometimes called fire log or something. I just call it, this is Sukhasana for me, where you bring your feet out, and now the shin closest to you, in this case, it's my left one, is parallel to the end of the mat. And for a lot of people, just moving out that far reveals hip restriction. And you
Mm.
sort of feel the pressure get pushed into the hips. If you can't do it sitting on the floor, then we elevate, we sit on a bolster. Sometimes people have to sit in a chair and just cross one foot over the knee, okay, to get into the hip. So there I was in this shape, and the pain started to show up as in my left hip, like, oh my gosh, there's that pain. But all of a sudden, I started to curve forward a little bit. I started to do this, and it really got my attention. And after about 30 seconds or so, I started to realize, oh my gosh, this is the head of my femur turning in the socket in a brand new way. It never happened before. And this actually feels helpful. So I'm hanging out there. And at this point, my knees were up here, and it didn't quite look the way it does right now. But I started playing with this shape. And and as time went by, my knees started to drop, my back started to curve, the whole shape started to change over weeks of just kind of spending a couple minutes in the shape here and there. And it just started to evolve more and more, and and found different ways to get into all the different joints. And the practice started to evolve, and the classes just started to grow and grow and grow. And to the point where I was having 50, 60, 70 people in the classroom sometimes. They just
Oh,
really
wow.
took off. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing because like watching you get into that position, it's not necessarily the hip that I would think about first, right? Like when you're in that position, I think about hamstrings and I think about
yeah,
hip flexors. So you're thinking about the musculature that's allowing you to cross your legs that way and pull your heels in and push back out. And I think that's really traditionally what a lot of people would consider when they're thinking about a yoga pose.
yeah,
And or if they're thinking about just flexibility training, because that's being able to move your knee in that position relative to your hips. You think about the musculature around. So to hear you think about feeling the joint and understanding what's happening in the joint is a really different way to think about what's going into that position.
You got it. Yeah, that's it. And I'm I am so conditioned now to think bones and joints, bones and joints. I don't even, the idea of stretching a muscle is completely out of the question for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, now I've shared this practice with thousands of students and I just see results. And like I said, it's usually the people who feel tight and stiff in their bodies. It's usually people over 50 who are drawn to this practice because they've either, you got to be around, you got to go around the block a couple times to really appreciate this. You either have had an injury that slowed you down and you want to get through it, you don't want to have surgery, or you've just had enough time on your body to where you're feeling the stiffness, and all of a sudden you're at this point in your life where you're looking maybe a decade or two down the road where you're thinking, you know what, if I don't do something about this soon, I may not be able to put my own t-shirt on in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I may, I want to stay mobile and independent, and that's hence the name of the book is called Mobility for Life. And I feel like if we can catch it before the degeneration gets too severe, like we can turn basic arthritis around quickly and we can turn around mild degeneration. We can clean things up pretty quickly if we catch it at the right time. And we even get results with more extreme situations, but it just takes more work and, you really got to commit to it. But basic hygiene for the joints just doesn't even take that long. A few hours a week is plenty. And so, that's the approach. We just want to take care of our bones and joints.
I love it. And so you went from having a studio where you were filling classes, 50, 60, 70 students at a time, to being able to touch many more thousands of people. Like, what was that transition like from thinking about it from a studio-based practice to really being able to look at people, I would say, globally?
Yeah. One of the toughest decisions I ever had to make. It took me a year to really make that decision. It sort of started in COVID because COVID pushed me online. And so then the online thing started to happen, but I still had a commitment to the landlord in this space. And so I had to keep that going. And as COVID started to kind of unwind, people wanted to get back in the studio. So it really started growing again. And I knew that I was at this point in my life where I had to change it up because as much as I love teaching, I just love teaching this practice, especially in person. It's so fun to teach and watch people's minds and bodies change before your eyes. I knew I had to get away from the brick and mortar so that I could write the book and in a way just transition away from the intense responsibility of brick and mortar ownership, and everybody I talked to. I remember one day in particular, I made meetings. I think I had 7 meetings in one day because I just wanted to meet with all these people that I really loved and respected and get their opinion. And out of 7 people, 6 of them said, "Jeff, no, there's no way. You got to keep teaching. You can't sell the studio." And 1 out of the 7 said, "Jeff, you have no idea how your life is going to open up if you just make this move and let it go." And that's the one that just hit my heart. And as hard as it was, I remember teaching the final classes, and it was a big deal. But anyway, it's sometimes, that's what we call really looking inside and following the heart. Sometimes fear can pull us into situations that we really probably should be moving away from and
Mm.
setting ourselves free. That's what this lifetime is all about.
Yeah, is that the advice you would give someone who's really thinking about maybe starting something different or engaging in something that they've been thinking about for a while as maybe a career or career change?
Oh my gosh. There's nothing more powerful in the universe than following those little tickles. It's a little tickle in your throat. It's a little butterfly feeling somewhere. It's something deep down inside you that just says, I'm supposed to be doing something else. And when we trust and follow that, that's the miracle. Amazing things happen. And sometimes, as I've shared in my story, it feels like you're hurting people. It could be family members, or it could be employees, it could be customers that you feel like you're hurting because you're making this heartfelt decision. But when we follow that guidance, the ripple effect of it is massive. And all those people that you think you're hurting or that you think you're letting down, guess what? They need to find something a little different too. And so,
Mm.
in a way, by us following our hearts, it requires other people to follow theirs and to kind of dismantle this, maybe it's called a love affair, or this attraction that they have to this situation that includes you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of it's an untethering that happens, and the love and the light that we share together remains. You can't take that away. But the form starts to change, and then it, you know, so long story short, yes, you cannot go wrong by following your heart.
I really think that's great advice, and I love how you talk about the fact that we don't often think about that ripple effect, because we are all very interconnected, and so the things that you do for yourself have an effect on what happens with other people, and that could be the beneficial effect that that person needed as well. So, thinking about all this, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, um, I'm right now. I'm I feel busier than I've ever been in my life. My wife, who's a retired dentist, is working full time for me right now with the book launch. We're in the very final edit. We've got this amazing publisher that is teaching us how to pre-sell the book, and so our lives are just full of creating these different packages for people to buy, not just one book, not just 5 books, but 25, 50 books, to have these
Wow.
opportunities to either, for example, do the teacher training if you buy 50 books. Um, I have a healing day where we spend a whole day together customizing a practice for a particular issue. If that's for 100 books, and the publisher will send the books directly to anybody. You provide the name and the address, and we handle sending them directly to them. So it's a pretty unique opportunity that I had no idea I would be working this hard to pre-sell a book with the hopes of maybe getting on a bestseller list. That's the whole idea, because now you have some momentum. And I did it the other way with my first book. 500 books landed in my garage, and I can say
Oh,
after 12
wow.
years, I'm down to 2 cases.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, and, and so selling a book after it's published, unless you develop a little momentum ahead of time, is the hard way. So it's a lot of work, and it's just pushing both my wife into a whole new territory. Um, you know, so anyway, and we have a book tour. I'm going to be doing a lot of workshops between now and August 5th when the book comes out. So that's my immediate future, and that's about as far down the road as I can see right now, artist.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, if people are interested in learning more about you and Avita Yoga, where do they go? How do they find you?
avitayogaonline.com. You can go directly to the book. The book is called Mobility for Life book.com. You can go there and purchase a copy of the book. And if you buy one, you'll have the opportunity to buy more. So, um, yeah, that's where it all happens these days. Avita Yoga
Amazing.
Online. Yeah.
Well, I have to thank you for spending time with me. This has been amazing. I think I've learned a lot around thinking differently about yoga practices, and thinking differently about muscle stretching versus taking care of the joints. And so it's been eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people. And I love the advice about following those little tickles, because those things are very important. And as people think about
So
their
important.
futures, it's important to be able to have some sort of guidance there. So thank you again.
Yes, for sure. That's it. That's important.
Well, much luck to you on the upcoming book, and hopefully I will get to kind of follow your progress, and maybe we'll talk again soon.
That'd be fun. Love to be on your show anytime, artist. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show, because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.